we often talk about female leadership and male leadership as if they were two different species. But what if it's not only misleading, but it's actually holding us back? I've spent most of my career researching leadership, and one of the topics I looked at was the differences between female and male leaders. And after years of data, interviews and observations, my answer was clear. The differences are small, inconsistent, and not that important. And what I found out is fully aligned with decades of international research. So we can start with the classic meta-analysis done by Eagle and colleagues in 1995, which found no overall gender differences. Then later, after nearly 20 years, followed by the study of Postian, Underdahl and her team, which confirmed the pattern and added an interesting twist. When leaders are evaluated by others, women are evaluated as slightly more effective. When leaders evaluate themselves, men evaluate or rate themselves higher. So it's not about performance, which was similar, but about the confidence. So confidence is different. Kaiser and Wallace added another interesting finding. If they asked if there is a bias against women and how it works, they found out that the bias exists, but if you ask people who actually work with leaders, then the bias largely disappears. So if you close to real behavior, then stereotypes lose power. And interesting and really large study done by Zenger and Folkman. They used 360 degrees feedback from nearly 7,000 leaders across industries. They found out that women in leadership positions scored slightly higher on 12 out of 16 leadership competencies, including integrity, developing others initiative. And men scored slightly higher on strategic thinking and technical expertise. The last study I would like to mention is the review which reviewed and summarized 50 years of leadership behavior and was published last year. Again, they confirmed that like both genders were equally effective, so the similarities, so the differences weren't significant. So the story is not about the differences between female and male leaders, but it's more about the perception. So it's not about the performance, but perception. If you look at numbers, just to see how it works out, you can see that women hold or make up approximately 2/5 of the global workforce, yet still hold just about 1/3 of the managerial positions. And here in the Czech Republic, the gap is even wider. You can see that a quarter of women are in leadership positions, and just a tiny fraction, 4% of CEOs are females. So and it's not about capability. If you look at majority of Czech university graduates, they are women. I can see that every year when I look at my students, that the talent is there, the ambition is there, but still most of them are hesitant to call themselves future leaders. At the same time, I live the paradox personally, as at our faculty, I'm the only woman heading a department. And besides academia, I've been working with leaders in companies, mostly in automotive industry, where outside HR you can hardly find a woman. So on one hand, data tells me women and men lead equally well, are equally effective. On the other hand, my lived experience tells me that women are still treated as an exception. So here's the paradox. If women and men lead equally well, why we keep labeling their leadership as different? When we say female leadership, we don't just describe something, we change it. As something ordinary make look unusual. And when something looks unusual, it gets scrutinized more harshly and judged more critically. So if you think about leadership, we traditionally associate leadership with traits like assertiveness, confidence, decisiveness, which are traditionally coded as masculine. So when women show these qualities or traits, they very often called aggressive. If they don't show them, they're seen very often as too soft. So it's too strong or not strong enough. Welcome to the double bind. Psychology calls this implicit bias, the automatic associations we make between gender and leadership. So the same leadership is interpreted differently, not by merit, but because of the lens of stereotype. Now, there is a powerful concept which captures how it plays out in careers, which is called glass cliff. You might know, or you may know, the glass ceiling, which is the invisible barrier that keeps women from rising to the top. The glass cliff is the stage when they finally get there. And usually when women are appointed to the top leadership positions, it's in times of crisis, because companies want to show the change, so they appoint a female leader to show the investors, to show the public that there is a change. And also people usually work more, or it works for them more to, let's say they just need some more security, they just need some more comfort. So they strive to have a leader who is more compassionate. But because the company is in crisis, usually it's really high risk of failure there. And when the CEO, the female CEO, fails, she's replaced, and then the cycle goes on. Let me give you a few examples, and some of them you might recognize. Here on your right is Carly Fiorina, who was the CEO of Hewlett-Packard, who was handed the wheel of the company in a so-called dot-com crisis, and she went through she initiated the merger with Compaq, which was highly controversial, and she was really heavily criticized for that. Even though the ex-post analysis showed that the merger actually helped HP to stay competitive. The other example is Mary Barra. I mentioned that I work for automotive industry, so I use this example, who was the first female CEO of General Motors, the huge automaker. And again, it was the time of crisis when she was appointed to the top position, when General Motors went through the safety scandals, so it was really difficult time. She had to change the company culture, organizational culture, to focus more on safety and accountability, and she succeeded. And the third example we can use is Linda Yaccarino, who was the CEO of Twitter, now X. And again, the wheel was handed in a situation when advertisers were leaving and public and the image of the company was really damaged. So different women, different industries, different stories, but they share a pattern. Each of them stepped into power during the time when the firm, the company was on fire. And there is an interesting mechanism. If she succeeds, if the female CEO succeeds, the crisis is suddenly described as manageable and under control. If she doesn't, then usually it becomes a story about what happens when you put a woman in charge. You can see it in numbers too. If you look here, you see that the female CEOs are 45% more likely to be fired, and the tenure is really much shorter for, let's say, the huge public companies. So, if we think about leadership, if gender is not the key to understanding what the leadership is, then what is? And according to my research and experience, it's not about differences between men and women. As we said, they really are similarly effective. It's much more about the bad and good leaders. And if you think about the good leaders, what's clear that the good leaders are those who are able to create trust and build connections with their followers, and the bad leaders usually create fear. Female leadership is not different. It's the same leadership as the male leadership, but we just interpret it differently because we look at it through the lens of stereotype. And psychology here offers a different lens. My esteemed colleague, leadership scholar Alex Haslam, and his colleagues call it the new psychology of leadership. And this approach is and define the, let's say, the good leadership as the leadership where leaders don't stand above their followers, but then they stand with them. Which means that leadership is not about the big ego, the dominance, or the power, but it's more about the ability to create a shared identity. So to be able to stand for the group, to stand with the group, and to define better what we stand for and who we are. And it's not just theory for us, as we, as a department, are part of the social identity leadership research group. And as we tested the social identity approach, the approach which is about the shared sense of us, it's absolutely clear that this concept is remarkably consistent across cultures, as we tested it in 30 cultures across contexts. And it's clear that when leaders consciously work with a shared we, then people feel more included, teams show higher trust and commitment, well-being and motivation of the followers increases and performance improves. So the mechanism that works is not masculinity or femininity, but it's leaders who are able to create and sustain a meaningful sense of us. As a consultant and mentor, I can see this shift in practice because the turning point in leadership development usually is when someone stops asking, how can I look more impressive as a leader, and start asking, how can we better, how can we strive together? And these are not female qualities, these are not male qualities, these are human qualities. So our favorite question, how do men and women lead differently, starts to feel much less useful. A better question might be, do our leaders care? Do they build a healthy we? Do they lead for the group or just for themselves? Leadership doesn't happen in isolation, so it's not about the leader, it's much more about followers. And followers choose whom to follow. So it's about us, as followers have more power than we think. So do we really choose the right leaders whom we followed or not? So imagine a future where leadership is defined not by gender, but by impact. And when the boardrooms are diverse as the environment which surround them. So if you think about the stereotypes which still are, which we usually absorb and internalize very early and don't realizing them, how can we work with them? How can we challenge them? So if you see the bias, then it's good to try to mentor someone who is different from us, and maybe to stop calling and stop using the label female leader. Because when we lead without labels and we follow leaders who lead for us, not for themselves, we all lead better. Thank you.